So the next speaker is Elena Goyoccia-Georgi. Is she here? Yes. So she's a researcher at University of Madrid, and she's going to talk about biomarkers, complement biomarkers, and their input for the clinical management of patients. So please, Elena.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. So I have to deal with this and that, so let's see how I manage to do this. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here today. So let's see. Okay, my disclosures. This is the layout I'm going to follow for this talk, so just a very brief background about complement-mediated diseases, and the samples, because it's going to be very important for this topic. Then I was asked to give a very general overview of the available panel of complement biomarkers, but of course, this is a huge topic, and for a 20-minute presentation, they won't have much time to go into detail. So I will just give just a very general overview. I will try just to highlight the clinical relevance and the potential impact on the management of the patients, and we'll end up with the unresolved issues or unmet needs in the field. Well, we are all very familiar with the complement system, but I think it's very important to be aware of this representation here, which indicates the proportion of these complement levels in circulation. So just by the size of the circles, you can have an idea of what's the proportional concentration of the different components of the complement system. And also it's very important to bear in mind that there is a huge variability between individuals in the complement levels. So for instance, there is a wide range of variation that can be up to 5-fold concentration difference, for instance, for factor H. And of course, this has an impact in the complement activity of the individuals. This is a representation of the complement activity that can go from very low complement activity to very high complement activity, and of course the general population will be within some margins that are considered normal, and we are all healthy. But then there are the extremes which are going to predispose to diseases. And this translates also into functional studies. This is just an example of the AP50 to evaluate the alternative pathway in the control population. So in fact, you can see this is very variable. And for this audience, it's important to know that the blue line is Santiago Rodriguez de Cordova serum, how it behaves in an AP50 assay, and the red line is my sample. So as you can see, there is a huge variability in the general population, healthy people, hopefully, and this complicates sometimes the results that we get from the patients, because we have to have a very good idea of what are the margins of the the control values. Of course, we are dealing with very complex and multifactorial diseases that they basically result from the uncontrolled complement activation, in this case through the alternative pathway mainly. So this has important implications because we require multiple factors for the disease to develop, and of course there are multiple pathogenic mechanisms involved that this will translate into a very heterogeneous complement profiles. And of course, in some cases, we will see evidence of complement abnormalities in the systemic level, but in other cases, they will be just restricted to the glomerular microenvironment. Just for the samples, I think it's important to bear in mind that for each sample, it's like having a snapshot in time and a photo of a particular situation that is a result of a combination of processes. So in that sample, the levels will depend on the expression of the proteins, but also on the activating status of that sample, so that whether there is consumption or not. Of course, we have different types of matrices where we can follow complement biomarkers from soluble type of samples, from like serum, plasma, urine, or from the biopsies. And the complement dynamics in all these samples might vary from parameter to parameter. And this is something also to keep in mind. Okay, this slide summarizes the way we can assess the complement system. There are various ways. So we can either measure complement components, and this is useful to detect the consumption or deficiencies that the person may have. We can also detect activation products from these complement components that will only be present if complement has been activated. We can assay the function of the complement system by various means. Different type of pathways can be assessed. And of course, we can have a look to the deposition of complement components on a tissue or on cells. But we can also detect the presence of autoantibodies, and of course, we can run complement genetics. So this would be the ideal complement workout to really know what's going on in terms of complement in an individual. Before moving into the detail of all the different type of tests we can run, I think it's important also what are the questions that we are asking to that we want to answer with these complement biomarkers, because it really depends on the context. One biomarker might be useful or not. So in the clinical setting, of course, it depends on at what stage of the disease we are dealing with. At the diagnosis, we really want biomarkers that can detect whether there is complement involvement. Obviously, we would like to distinguish between different complement-mediated diseases, but this, I guess, is going to be extremely difficult. Ideally, we want to also work out with which are the pathways or specific abnormalities or mechanisms that are involved. And this will obviously have an impact in the treatment selection. So we want biomarkers to guide the treatment decisions, whether we should use complement inhibitors or just immune suppressor. Of course, the biomarkers can tell us something about the prognosis, whether a patient is going to have more probabilities to reach end-stage renal disease, for instance, or whether we can pick recurrences. But biomarkers can be also very, very useful just to monitor the disease activity, the severity, and obviously, ideally, we would like to see how if it can tell us something about which patients are going to respond or not to particular therapies. So in the next slide, I'm trying to compile the most common biomarkers that are being used in touching on all the different biomarkers that I was telling you in the summary slide. Of course, I cannot mention everything and all the detail, but I hope you can have an idea of the type of information that these biomarkers can give us. So, in terms of the complement protein levels, the most widely available are, of course, C3, C4 in the clinical practice, and these can tell us something about, obviously, whether there are deficiencies or not in a particular samples, but we cannot exclude whether this is because of complement consumption or, I wanted to say that low levels of these proteins cannot exclude whether there is complement consumption or a deficiency, as we can see, for instance, in this image where the complement profiles for C3 levels can be very different across multiple complement-mediated diseases. And of course, you cannot rule out just by measuring C3 levels, for instance, whether a particular individual may have a complement dysfunction, because the normal levels cannot pick all the complement dysregulations that the patients may have, But of course, by measuring these, the levels of these proteins, you can have an idea whether there is some abnormalities in complement consumption of specific pathways, whether there is the classical, the lectin with C4 or C3 with alternative pathway, but also we can measure complement regulators, which are suggestive of dysregulation of the alternative pathway. Of course, we can measure C5 as a marker of activation, maybe of the terminal pathway. And of course, these have important implications in the clinical management, because it's going to say something if complement might be involved, so if low levels may suggest this. They are very helpful, really, to classify rare variants that we may identify in the genetic testing, And C5, it's also what has been used commonly for monitoring complement inhibition. Also, just brought here a couple of additional markers that are just in research labs, but they seem to have prognostic values in samples of C3G, IgA nephropathy, so which are very, very interesting. Of course, there are limitations with these normal complement levels, but then if we move to the activated proteins or complexes of the complement system, they give us a direct idea of whether there is activation of complement in a particular sample, because they will only be present if complement has been activated, obviously. We can detect various C3 activating fragments, C4D, C5A, fragments from the factor B, or complexes from the terminal pathway, the soluble C5b9, or even I brought here two other complexes that I thought it was interesting because they can really tell us whether the classical or the lectin pathways are being involved. So these are very early markers of classical and and lectin pathway activation markers. So these are very useful, obviously telling us the different type of initiation or terminal pathways, and they will have an important impact because in this case, as I'm saying, they really tell us what's the status of complement activation in that particular sample, and very useful for monitoring disease activity and, of course, complement inhibition. The only problem with these ones is that they are mainly used in research labs or specialized labs, and so they are not really translated into the clinical practice. And there are some cautions that have to be taken because we have to avoid in vitro complement activation that may give false positive results. And to avoid that, we really need to be careful and use EDTA plasma samples to stop any complement activation, and a correct handling of the samples is really required. One of the caveats that we have with these fragments is that plasma samples cannot rule out complement activation in the glomerular microenvironment. So a negative result in this plasma sample is not really a definitive proof that there is no complement activation going on in the kidney. But maybe this can be solved by measuring these markers in the urine, that in many occasions, in the context also of, let's say, hemolytic uremic syndrome and C3G, some of these activating fragments have been detected in the urine samples and associated with the disease activity. We also talk about functional assays to measure overall complement activity. Of course, I just highlighted some of the assays here, but there are many more also in the outside in other research labs or even some commercial type of tests that can be used. These assays, they really tell you something about the activity of the complement system, but it cannot tell you anything about the specific molecule that might be involved or being abnormal in a particular sample. But they are really, really good, most of them, to determine whether there is any particular complement dysfunction or not in a particular sample. And of course, the most, I would say, widely available are maybe the CH50 that can detect the overall complement activity and through the classical pathway, but we can also have AP50 for the alternative pathway. They are very useful to detect deficiencies or consumption of complement. We also have some specific type of assays, like this SHIP red blood cell assay, that detect factor H impairment in controlling complement regulation on surfaces. And of course, we have also very interesting functional studies based on cells where they can pick abnormalities to regulate complement on cell surfaces. So this is key to the pathologies. And of course, there are some caveats with this type of assays because they really require a very specialized labs for doing this, but they are very informative in terms of the dysfunction in a sample. And what's interesting also about the HMEC1 type of assay is that it can detect predisposition for complement dysregulation in samples that are in remission. And I think this is really very interesting information, because sometimes the availability of samples at the disease diagnosis is not possible. So this type of assay allows you to work out whether there is a problem, a dysfunction in that particular individual. And of course, these are very useful for screening complement dysfunction in general and for monitoring complement inhibition. And just here some limited values for CH50 and AP values. You cannot detect really whether you are facing a complement consumption or a genetic deficiency, so they do not provide mechanistic information. But I think if you just want to see whether in a sample there is complement consumption, they are very, very useful, and these are more broadly, I would say, used in the clinical setting compared to the other ones. Regarding the detection of the antibodies, there are very important antibodies to be detected, the anti-factor H, anti-factor B, the C3 nephritic factors. There are different methods to detect those, and they tell us different things. If you detect an anti-factor H antibody, obviously, you know that they impair complement regulation by factor H, and this is a way of dysregulating alternative pathway. The anti-factor B antibodies, they have been shown to increase formation of the C3 convertase, and the nephritic factors, they can stabilize convertases. This is even not only the alternative C3 convertase, but also the classical C4 convertase. So these are very interesting, and compared to the other complement biomarkers, these detection of these antibodies, they have diagnostic value, such as the case of, because they really detect an acquired complement dysregulation in the patient samples and will guide the treatment decision. This is very important. Anti-factor H antibodies, you know that they are very prevalent in atypical HUS, and they can help to predict the risk of recurrence, the levels. Anti-factor B are more prevalent in acute post-infectious GM. And obviously, the nephritic factors are common drivers in C3G. But of course, there are very important limitations when you want to study them, because they are, for instance, nephritic factors are extremely high heterogeneous in the type, the convertases that can regulate, and potential mechanisms to stabilize the convertases. And there is complexity and variability also in the detection methods that complicates standardization of this type of assays. But I would like just to show you in the next slide one of these assays, because I think it's a very interesting assay because it's very easy, I would say, and it's the LFA method. I don't know if you are aware of this, but last year it was published by the group of Santiago Rodriguez de Córdoba, this novel immunoglobulin for rapid detection of these anti-factor H antibodies. And basically this is like this cassette that we are all now very familiar after the COVID pandemic. So you can get a result about the presence of anti-factor H antibodies in just 15 minutes. And it's very easy to handle. You can read the intensity of the band, so this detect the complex of factor H with an anti-factor H antibody. So this is also very important because it does not detect free antibody, it detects the complex of the autoantibody and factor H. So this is what is really relevant for the disease pathogenesis. And actually here you can see how you can use this type of test to monitor immunosuppression in this patient, how this band kind of disappears with the time. And actually it's been shown that this type of test it outperformed the ELISA test that detected the free anti-factor H antibodies. So this is a simple, fast, cost-effective, and likely more clinically relevant alternative for diagnosing anti-factor H antibodies in at-risk populations. Of course, patterns of complement activation will vary depending on which pathway has been involved in the initiation or whether the terminal pathway has also been activated. And by studying different markers that are specific for the different pathways, you can have really a very nice idea of what's going on in terms of complement dysregulation. This is a prototypical pattern of what you would expect to see when there is a classical pathway-driven complement activation. This is an example of SLE in an active sample where you will see a decrease in all these components of the classical pathway. And also it may affect a decrease, sorry, the blue indicates decrease of these components. Also, it will affect not only the classical pathway, but a little bit of the alternative pathway activity. If it proceeds towards the end, you will have an increase in soluble C5b9 fragment detection. But of course, you will have normal levels for the factors that are alternative pathway specific, such as factor H, factor B, and the image will be different if you have dysregulation through the alternative pathway. This is an example of what would happen in a situation where you have a factor H deficiency in a heterozygosity. You will maintain normal levels for the classical components, but of course you will have decreased levels of the alternative pathway type of components, and of course you may have the increase in the complex of the terminal pathway. But so by studying different markers of the complement system, you can really work out all the different pathways that are involved. And here, just by measuring C3 and C4, you can get an idea of the initiation pathway, whether there is an alternative pathway activation only when there is low C3, but in the context of normal C4, or you can detect classical pathway activation or lectin pathway activation, as you have said here, when also you have C3, C4 levels that are below the normal levels. But of course, patterns can be very complicated, and we know this by a very nice study from the Italian groups, where by doing this clustering analysis based on various different type of variables from clinical complement parameters, genetics, and so on, they can really identify 4 groups of patients of C3G and IC-MPGN type of patients. But as you can see here, there are different type of patterns in terms of complement dysregulation. Some of them, the first 3, they will have a very clear evidence of fluid phase complement activation with the low levels of C3. Some of them may have, in combination with C5 dysregulation, because they, as you can see, there is high levels of soluble C5b9. Others might be normal in the context of fluid phase regulation at the level of C3. And you can also have other type of patients where you can't detect any evidence of complement dysregulation in the systemic sample, in a plasma sample, for instance. And actually, this clustering provides a prognostic value, because actually cluster 4 is the one having the poor prognosis compared to all the rest. Of course, there are practical challenges in the clinical application of these complement biomarkers. Actually, from all the lists that I have been discussing before, very little are really being used in the clinical practice. So we have C3, C4 levels, CH50, AP50, and not in all places around the world. And of course, there are also clinical challenges that is very nicely summarized in this review from some authors here in the audience, where depending also on the type of sample that you are analyzing, they will have different type of limitations. But we have going into detail now because of the lack of time. I'm just going to summarize what this type of the experience indicates, what are the unmet needs in complement biomarkers in the clinical setting. Obviously, I guess the general point is that there is a current, that the current biomarkers, at least the ones that are being used in the clinic, are insufficient for precision medicine in complement-mediated kidney diseases. And the key limitations for this is that there is an incomplete biological information that is provided by single biomarkers. So really, no single biomarker captures the disease activity or the pathway specificity, and of course, the treatment response. There is also a poor clinical pathological correlation, so weak associations sometimes between what we observe in the biopsies and what can be correlated with the biomarker systemically. So sometimes there is this systemic and intrarenal mismatch. The blood biomarkers doesn't necessarily illustrate what's going on in the kidney. And there is a limited role in therapy guidance, so there is no standardized tools to select the patients and to monitor complement inhibitors and to define treatment duration. The disease heterogeneity, as has been discussed in the previous presentation, is not really captured with a single biomarker. And especially C3G and IC-MPGN is extremely complex, but also, of course, complement-mediated TMA. And we need really a mechanism-based stratification. Of course, in the context of the laboratory, there are also unmet needs in terms of complement biomarkers. And actually, it was very, very interesting, the data that generated a group of experts in complement, that they set up a program to assess the external quality assurance, were basically working in combination with many different diagnostic labs around the world. They were assessing the performance of the different laboratories. They really identify the weaknesses and methods in the procedures. They generate comparable data over time, so they follow the different, the performance of all these labs during many, many years. And I actually think this is a very important work to really, and a tool to go towards a standardization of the complement diagnostic. But I guess the messages that they provide, they can be summarized in this slide. So complement testing is not sufficiently standardized and is not reproducible everywhere. And the key limitation for this was that obviously there was this lack of standardization. There are no reference methods or universal calibrators. So the results cannot be exchangeable across labs. They realized there is a significant interlaboratory difference for some of the markers of the complement system, particularly in functional assays, but also in soluble C5b9 and the C3 nerves. There was a huge difference on the data generated by the different labs. And what is interesting is there is a greater dispersion in clinical relevant scenarios. So in fact, the variability was lower in the control samples compared to the variability in samples that have actually a disease. So this complicated the situation. There are pre-analytical challenges, like many errors were due to sample handling and ex vivo activation. And there were really structural limitations. And so I think this is very important because the availability of labs performing all the different complement tests is very limited around the world. So I think effort really needs to be put into trying to make this more standard and more available across the globe. So we need a global harmonization, obviously robust assays and strict pre-analytical control. And just to summarize, I didn't want to spend much time, but I wanted to give a positive note to end up this presentation. So basically, I think we have several tools to assess the complement system. Actually, we can almost have answers for whatever we want to do, but we really need expert knowledge to really interpret these results correctly. So I think we may still be, although we may still be far from the ideal, I think the distance we have already covered brings us closer than ever to precision medicine in complement-mediated diseases. And thank you for your attention.
We have time for one single question, so choose wisely.
Thank you very much, Elena. This was great and fantastic, and it's a difficult and broad topic. In this way, regarding the road to take for the very future, I think one big obstacle which you handled, which you introduced and showed, is this treatment of serum to avoid activation in the probe. It might be something that we put on the list for the next meeting or meetings to find ways to avoid this dry ice shipment and make this more easy for the assay for antibodies like this. I think we should put this on the list for future work.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point, yeah. So I don't know if I have time to comment much more. I think I have already spent all the time for the presentation. But
Thank you so much, Elena. We need to move forward, so thank you.